Well, thanks very much for joining us. Back to contact training now. Matches just around the corner. What's it been like just having at least a little bit of your normal life back?
Oh, it's been wonderful. It seems to have gone very quickly too, because when we started back, it was obviously real sort of pre-season stuff, and there wasn't a clear end in sight either. We didn't know quite how long we'd have to carry on with that enormous social distancing and no real ball work or football work even to speak of. And then all of a sudden the meeting takes place and suddenly we're back to playing even the possibility of playing 11-a-side football. So it's gone very quickly, but it's been well received by everybody. And of course, it was the right time because the players were working by themselves in our club as in other clubs by themselves, and trying hard to keep themselves fit. But it's nothing like the training you're going to do with your teammates in a real training environment.
So what were those early days like when you returned to Beckenham? It sounds like, even for someone with all your experience, you found it very odd, very strange.
It was strange in the sense it was nice to be there, even though we were so limited and restricted as to what we can do. But also, of course, for everybody, there was an element of great to be back, but in circumstances really where it was hard to find a way of breaking the sort of boredom of it. You know, when you've got an hour and basically you can't do any ball work, you can't pass the ball one to the other, it's you with your ball and codes that you're going to run between. There's so little that you can do. And I think our conditioning trainer, Scott Geyer, did a fantastic job trying to think up ways which would make it slightly less boring. But for myself and the rest of the coaching staff, basically there was no coaching to be done. So we were there really as an appendix to the whole thing, in an attempt to help him motivate the players and help him sort of get behind them a little bit to keep them going through this somewhat arduous work that was the only work we could do.
But with the work you've started to be able to do, that physically, tactically, you will be able to get your team right for the big kickoff or the resumption at least?
Well, it's a difficult question, that, because, you know, what is right, I suppose. It was never going to be the absolute ideal situation. But, I mean, certainly it's every bit as good as I thought we were going to get, if not better. But it's, as I've heard other managers say, it's not going to be easy just with this, 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks maximum of actual being able to train them as a team and coach them as a team tactically. You're going to be spot on when the first game comes around. But I think the Premier League have done such a fantastic job in getting us to a position where we can play the first game. So I certainly don't have any complaints. And the major concern for us all is going to be a lot of games in a fairly short space of time, a long period without us having played any matches, and how are we going to deal with the injury situations which are absolutely bound to occur.
Do you feel like that could be a big issue, injuries, more so than normal?
Well, no more perhaps than it would be at a hectic stage of the season where you're playing 9 matches in 6 games. But it's going to take players a little bit of time to get used to the conditioning elements, really, that playing matches demand, especially when it's midweek matches. And, we're not as used, if you like, to midweek matches as some of the bigger teams in front of us who get a lot of midweek periods where they're playing Champions League or Europa League, but they also maybe have the slightly bigger squads to be able to deal with it.
But were you always really keen for the league to resume if it was safe to do so, Roy?
Yes, I was, because I think there's no other satisfactory way of resolving this season. It's a great pity when you've played, over 2/3 of the season to find yourself in a situation where you can't resolve all the issues that a football season brings and the things you play for, i.e. trying to win the league, trying to get into European places and trying to avoid relegation. These are what makes a league season. And I really couldn't see how a decision was ever going to be reached where everybody would say this is fair, this is okay, this is what needs to be done, without actually playing the 9 games. So it's great that we've got to that situation, that stage. But of course, people will have to realise that it's perhaps not as ideal or as fluent, I suppose is the right words, it would have been had we not had this 3-month hiatus where we haven't been able to play any competitive football at all.
How did you find lockdown, Roy? I always think of you as being someone who's rounded enough to cope with a life without football, but was that the case?
Nice to say so. Well, it wasn't easy. I've got to say in the beginning, because you established a different type of routine to your life. And, it certainly was a godsend getting the exercise bike that was delivered from the club, because our gym in the complex here was closed down quite early on. So that gave at least an hour's meaning to the day, that you could do something really physical. And of course, we're lucky where I live to have a lot of good walks as well. And I suppose I'm fortunate that, I like reading, which not everybody does. So that also gave me an opportunity, if you like, to pass the hours. So the first couple of weeks, it was different. And, one was still optimistic that we would get back to where we are now, perhaps even maybe a bit quicker than we've been able to do so. But as it dragged on, it got a little bit harder. And in particular, it got harder listening to all the reports and all of the suggestions that were being made, when the optimism that I had, well, this is something we have to learn to live with for a short period of time, but it will all get resolved and we will get these matches played. There were periods when it looked as though we might not get to that stage. There was a lot more doom and gloom, not just in terms of football, but doom and gloom in general. So that was a tougher little part, if you like, of the lockdown. But now I'm pleased to say that there's an awful lot to look forward to. And certainly from watching the players in training, I can see they share that optimism.
Before we go, Roy, I just wanted to change tack slightly and just ask you about modern day footballers. We've seen a lot of players, a lot of clubs do a lot of good during the course of this crisis. We're seeing players right now use their status to support protesters over what's happening in America. And it's maybe that goes against the grain of how players are stereotyped at times. So in your experience, having dealt with footballers, managed footballers for a long, long time, what would you say about the modern group, if you can group a group of guys together like that?
Well, I've always been very strong in my defensive players. I've always railed against the stereotype of the football player who doesn't have too much more to his life than just kicking a ball around. And you talk about people being rounded. I think football players are far more rounded, far more intelligent, far more interesting as characters than sometimes they're given credit for, because the public only see a certain aspect of that person, i.e. they see him interviewed before or after an emotional football match, and they make their opinions based on what they've heard or seen there. But I'm very proud of, certainly at Crystal Palace, what our players have done during this crisis, both in terms of trying to help the foundation to make certain that we really do contribute as best we can also to the National Health Service and all of the organisations really that need assistance at this time. And of course, I'm always very pleased to see them taking a political interest as well. And especially seeing a club like ours, which we're in South East London. We have in our mix a lot of black players anyway, and it doesn't concern me at all to see them thinking about those bigger topics and even making a stand. We've seen recently the James Sancho incident the weekend when he played Borussia Dortmund. And I don't think anyone would really blame him for doing that and showing his appreciation of the situation out there and how he feels about it. The only problem is, of course, that it's been pretty clear and made clear for us in football that we can't make political statements. So I'm afraid anyone who decides he's going to do that must accept that the yellow card will follow until such time as FIFA change the rules and say that players can lift their shirts and show T-shirts bearing political slogans.
Roy, thanks very much for answering that, and thanks very much for your time. It's great to speak to you again. Look forward to seeing you on the touchline very soon.
I do too. Thanks, Patrick.